You're alive! So in this video, you and me are going to check out the kills and gore in Re-animator. But if we're going to do this properly, you're going to need some reagent of your own. Luckily, it's really easy to make, and all you need is some rubbing alcohol or a clear spirit like vodka, a container, and a yellow luminous marker. Yeah, you'd have thought green, I know, but apparently yellow works the best. Now there's two types of marker you can get. One type has the little felt sticks inside, and you just take that out and pop it in the alcohol. But depending on the quality of the marker, you might need a few of them, and you might also need to squeeze the felt stick a little bit to get some of the liquid out, which is why I like the ones with the liquid inside a plastic stick. You just cut the outer layer off and squeeze the stick with some pliers, and the liquid comes out of the nib. Great, now that we've both got our reagent, let's get gory. Re-animator is a movie that grabs you and won't let go, and the whole tone is set by the intro sequence where we get introduced to Dr. Herbert West and we get our first kill. Gruber. One of the great things about the opening, aside from the sweet kill, is of course the mysterious reagent. I mean, it just looks cool as fuck, and it gets us hooked on the story as we can't wait for Herbert West to use it again. And it's not long before we get to see more of what the reagent can do. We next get introduced to all the main cast. There's Dan, a doctor in training who's easily scared. There's Dr. Hill, who has bad guy written all over him, and Dean Halsey, who runs the medical school where most of the action takes place, a medical school in Arkham. Not to be confused with Batman's Arkham City, although how cool would that be? Dan needs somebody to help share the rent, you know, because of inflation, and Herbert West, who has somehow managed not to get arrested in Switzerland, turns up to rent a room. Meg knows trouble when she sees it, but Dan is quickly seduced by the fast-talking West and a nice wedge of cash. That'll probably help pay the gas bills. So Dr. Hill is framed as the bad guy, with West occupying a grey area. But actually, how bad is West? Well, we know he's willing to kill to protect his work.
I will be famous.
He also sets his sights on Dan as somebody he can use, because in his own words,
people respect you, and you have access to certain authorities.
Meaning that Dan's well in with Dean Halsey, somebody who could potentially green light testing on dead human bodies. He gets Dan on board by reanimating the cat, again in his own words.
That is why I brought the infernal beast back to life in the first place.
So did he kill the cat for the demonstration? I don't know about you, but I always thought the excuse
It knocked the garbage over and it got its head stuck in a jar.
Was pretty flimsy. And finally, did he kill Dr. Gruber? He's caught on the scene administering the reagent, but it's never explained how Gruber initially died. West says,
I gave him life.
Indicating that Gruber was in fact already dead. So either West killed him to test out the reagent, or possibly Gruber was in on the experiment himself, deliberately inducing death somehow so that West could revive him. In class, Dr. Hill is showing everyone where he gets his burger meat from, but West is left unimpressed. Interrupt Dr. Hill at your own peril. Oh, that's a fucking plastic pen. Later at dinner we find out that Dr. Hill has the hots for Meg, who's the Dean's daughter and Dan's fiancée. And what's interesting is that this scene is greatly expanded depending on which version of the movie you're watching. In some versions it's a lot longer and shows that Dr. Hill has hypnotising powers. So there's basically three versions of the movie. The unrated theatrical version that keeps all of the gore but ditches the hypnotising scenes. There's an R-rated cut that removes the gore but adds in the hypnotising scenes to pad out the movie. Probably this is the version you've seen on TV, and it's possibly the version I have here, although I haven't watched it in a long time because it's on some weird plastic rectangle. Finally, there's the integral version that's available on some DVDs and Blu-rays, which is kind of like a best of both worlds cut. that has all the extra scenes from the R-rated version and all of the gore of the unrated version. I think I prefer the integral version a little bit more because it better explains how Dr. Hill is able to control the reanimated dead later in the movie. But the extra scenes do bog it down slightly, a little bit more than the slick pace of the uncut version. So there's merits to watching both versions really, as long as you're not watching the one with the gore cut out. Anyway, Dan and Meg return home to find that Meg's cat is dead. I'll tell you the deets later. West reanimates the poor thing and it turns into a scratchy motherfucker hell beast. Dan manages to splat the beast and West reanimates the poor cat again to show him the power of the reagent. Dan and West's relationship is another great thing about the movie. Dan is sucked into West's world in a frighteningly realistic way, and before long he's in so deep that there's no option for him but to just go along with all the madness. Together, West and Dan sort of form the main character of the movie because on their own they wouldn't really work. Dan's too much of a bystander to be the hero, and West is too manipulative and morally questionable for us to get fully behind. So together they sort of form Dr. Dan West. Two characters balancing each other out. Dan tries to convince Halsey of West's potential, but he gets himself and West banned from the school. Halsey's actions are quite rash here, but again they make more sense in the integral version, where we know that Dr. Hill has hypnotized and is likely controlling Halsey to get rid of West and Dan, who are now forced to continue their experiments illegally. And that's when everything goes to shit and we get our next couple of kills. Yeah, I fucking love that Ultimate Warrior stomp. Halsey is now a reanimated corpse and Dr. Hill begins to figure out what happened. He pays a visit to West and quickly makes a move to steal the reagent for himself. West hands over his work and just stares into oblivion, which is pretty weird unless you're watching the integral version. That again shows that Hill is using his force of will hypnotizing powers to dominate West. West, whose will is actually really strong as well, manages to break free and we get another sweet kill. West can't help himself and also reanimates Dr. Hill's body, who knocks West out and takes the reagent. Hill then begins to create an army of reanimated corpses, starting with Dean Halsey, who he orders to kidnap Meg. I'm not actually sure what his overall plan is at this point. I mean, his career is pretty much dead unless he does talking head YouTube videos or something. But whatever his plans, he's still definitely got the hots for Meg, who's about to get head. Luckily, West and Dan burst into the rescue. Don't you think there's a lot of Evil Dead style energy in this movie? From the kills and the gore to some of the more slapstick moments like the reanimated cat sequence. Throw in some more inventive camera angles and this could have almost been directed by Sam Raimi himself. As far as horror comedies go, Re-animator is widely considered to be one of the best, right up there with Evil Dead 2. And hell, if you gave Dan a little bit of swagger, he'd make a pretty decent Ash Williams. Now if the movie wasn't fucked up enough already, the final turns the fuckometer up to 11. Dr. Hill springs a trap for Dan and West, but Halsey turns against Dr. Hill and kills him before being ripped apart by Hill's minions. West then injects Hill's body with a giant overdose of reagent that turns his guts into sentient homicidal guts that tried to strangle West. In the chaos, West is last seen tangled up in the guts, whilst Dan and Meg manage a brief escape before Meg is ambushed and unfortunately killed by one of the reanimated dead. I think Meg's death at the end kind of sucks, and it would have been nice to see her survive and return in Re-animator 2. I think her presence would definitely strengthen the sequel a little bit more, but I'll go over that in my next video. So let's check out the final scores for Re-animator. Re-animator is the whole horror package, a decent amount of kills with some great gore effects. And there's inventiveness and flair behind almost every kill, but the real appeal here is the characters and their interactions with each other. Re-animator unfolds like an epic tragedy. West is so blinded by the power of the reagent, he pushes aside all matter of ethics and brings everyone around him down with his eagerness to experiment with the reagent. Dan is probably the most tragic character, a promising med student with a pretty hot girlfriend. He loses everything. Poor Meg loses her father and eventually her life, and for fuck's sake, Halsey loses his life not once but twice. You know, I really feel sorry for everyone in the movie. They're just living these pretty decent lives before getting hit by a luminous green tidal wave that is West and his reagent. I mean, hell, if you're just watching the uncut version, even Dr. Hill is really just minding his own business. The difference with Hill being that he just tries to control the situation and attempts to take the reagent for himself. So fuck off Romeo and Juliet, they should be teaching this shit at school instead. The movie ends seemingly with everybody dead, but luckily for us that's not the end of most of these characters. Join me next time and we'll take a look at the sequel, Re-animator 2. Ooh, and before you go, Dr. West left a note for you. Oh, there it is.